World War II from the German perspective. Goal is to offer an alternate perspective on what led up to World War II, which may help understand where we are today. History repeats. This will be from the German perspective. Keep in mind who is telling the truth. The victors write history. Our nation was subverted after the Civil War via the 13th and 14th Amendments. The 13th allowed voluntary slavery, and the 14th set up the 14th Amendment citizenship status, which took away our God given rights and deceived people into volunteering for privileges and immunities. In 1933, the U.S. government amended the 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act to state that American citizens are the enemies of their own government. Therefore, was the U.S. government, who considered its people the enemy, telling the truth about Germany and all of our allies, or spreading propaganda to serve its own ends? What were we really fighting for, and who were we fighting for? Were we, are we free? And what was Germany and her allies fighting for? Example, the Civil War. We were told we fought to free the slaves, when in reality, we fought to enslave all the people in the entire nation. And that same concept applies to what happened in World War II. Keep in mind that per the above, we know that the government views us as the enemy. The January 6th event was a psychological operation set up. So in reality, it was just a protest. I know people that were there and with nothing more. However, at the same time of the protest, the government, run by communists, working with Antifa, Marxists, had actors, operatives pretend to be Trump supporters who were allowed into the Capitol, and the controlled media made up a fake story about an attack. Now they have taken this PSYOP, false narrative, and are using it to vilify all Trump supporters, Republicans, conservatives, whites, and Christians, labeling everyone as a terrorist. Via lies and propaganda, we are being made out to be an enemy. So, in comparison, was Germany really the threat we have been indoctrinated with? Are we the Germans of today? In my opinion, Germany was the last organized national resistance on an international scale to the satanic Jewish communist New World Order Great Reset we have been and are watching unfold over the last 3 years. Where we are today, our nation and the entire world, is a direct result of the outcome of World War II. A few quotes to set the foundation of the German perspective. Gerda Bormann, the wife of Martin Bormann, in a letter to Martin at the end of the war, said, "We are not the first to engage in mortal combat with the powers of the underworld, and that we feel impelled and are also able to do so should give us a conviction of ultimate victory." And note, she was murdered, poisoned, shortly at the end of the war to get at her husband. Henry Finet was a Frenchman, and he was a battalion commander of the SS Charlemagne Division. And he said, "In my heart, I knew they, the Germans, were right, and working in the best interests of Europe. I fought for a noble and great idea. I fought for a better world for all to live in. I fought the devil, and he was angry." I feel like we're fighting the devil today. It is my belief in the end, there will be final victory, where we will never have to fight in this battle again. And note, this division was one of the last to defend Berlin. Kind of interesting, Frenchmen defending Berlin. Ernst Krag, he was a battalion commander of the Das Reich Division, and he wrote, "By 1945, I finally saw the war for what it was, a united front to destroy the ideas that were a threat to communism and world Jewry." And the Germans had hoped the US and England would see who the true enemies were, the Soviets and communists. They didn't realize, I guess, at the time it was a united front. So they didn't know or realize that the US and England were already under communist control. Julius Luther, one of the founders or leaders of the German Christian movement, wrote, "We sensed that the battle to be fought in Germany will be global in scope. We felt that the battle for the rebirth of Germany was a battle for the rebirth of the whole world. We could believe again that Germany is the heart of the world and that the destruction of Germany would mean the destruction of the world and the salvation of Germany, the salvation of the world. Germany, wedged between Western Mammonism and Eastern anarchy, the plaything of Jewish high finance and the destructive lust of Asiatic bestiality, was the land of the people decisive for the continued existence of the world. And note that in 1939, the official German census figures showed that 94% of Germans were Christian. So they were a Christian country. And on the Wehrmacht and the SS belt buckles, it did state, God is with us. General Patton, and this is kind of confirming the above quote, in the Patton papers, his diaries and or letters that were accumulated and put in book form, on page 744, he wrote, actually, the Germans are the only decent people left in Europe. If it's a choice between them and the Russians, I prefer the Germans. The attitude of the American people, as evidenced by the press and radio, is such that I am inclined to think I made a great mistake in serving them for nearly 40 years. The more I see of people, the more I regret that I survived the war. I can't tell them, the American people, the truth that unless we restore Germany, we will ensure communism takes America. And then he was murdered shortly after. So I don't know if it sounds like he felt he did the right thing in the war. So backing up a little bit to 1879, this I think is a very important and prophetic quote by a guy named Wilhelm Marr in his book Conquest of Germanism by Judaism. He wrote, the advent of Jewish imperialism, I am firmly convinced, is only a question of time. The empire of the world belongs to the Jews. Ve victis, woe to the conquered. I do not pretend to be a prophet, but I am quite certain that before 4 generations have passed, there will not be a single function in the state, the highest included, which will not be in the hands of the Jews. At the present moment, alone amongst European states, Russia still holds out against the official recognition of the invading foreigners. Russia is the last rampart, and against her the Jews have constructed their final trench. To judge by the course of events, the capitulation of Russia is only a question of time. In that vast empire, Judaism will find the fulcrum of Archimedes, which will enable it to drag the whole of Western Europe off its hinges once and for all. The wily Jewish spirit of intrigue will bring about a revolution in Russia such as the world has never yet seen. When it, Judaism, shall have laid Russia prostrate, it will no longer have any attacks to fear. When the Jews shall have got control of the Russian state, they will set about the destruction of the social organization of Western Europe. This last hour of Europe will arrive at latest in 100 or 150 years, seeing that nowadays things move more rapidly than in former times. What Russia has to expect from the Jews is quite clear. And 40 years later, what happened? The Russian Revolution, such as the world has never seen. 60 years later, World War II pulled Europe off its hinges. And 150 years later, 2029, the satanic implementation of UN Agenda 2030 and the one world government. Backing up to 1848, the Marxist revolution in Germany and Europe. 1848, there was a communist Marxist uprisings all over Europe, Germany, Hungary, Austria, Italy, France, and I believe other countries. The failed revolution spurred the significant immigration of 48ers to America. Many of these 48ers were Jews. Many of these went on to start and or grow the Republican Party, which, along with foreign, English, and Jewish abolitionists, was the cause of the Civil War. Many Marxists and Jews went on to be Union generals and occupied other powerful positions, including electors and advisors for Lincoln. The point is, this was all part of the World Revolution. Side note, the Seligmans, who were Jews, were the bankers for the U.S. under Lincoln. Lincoln also had August Belmont, who was a Jew, who was the main Rothschild agent in the U.S., as his advisor. He also had a Delano, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had a Delano and a Forbes working with him as well. So, who already controlled our government? So, Karl Marx, founder of Marxism, Lenin and Stalin based their movements on. His real name was Moses Mordecai Levy. Ancestors on both sides of his family had rabbis in it. I know his dad's side was in Trier. Marx's mom's side married into the Phillips family, the Phillips Electronics. They were a large banking family. Lion Phillips, from that wealthy banking industrial family, helped finance Karl Marx after Marx was exiled. Marx's maternal grandma's side married into the Rothschilds, and Nathan Rothschild helped finance Karl Marx, and the checks are or were on display in the British Museum. I had seen them online, but I am not sure they are available anymore online. So it's odd that people with all the money in the world would want to finance someone like Marx, right? Communism is nothing without the financial elite backing. Benjamin Disraeli, in the book Lord George Bentinck, a political biography, wrote, actually, George Bentinck is the one that wrote it. They, the Jews, may be traced in the last outbreak of the destructive principle in Europe, which was the Marxist Revolution. The abrogation of property are proclaimed by the secret societies who form provisional governments, and men of Jewish race are found at the head of every one of them. And so you can think of the French Revolution, you can think of the Russian Revolution. So fast forwarding to the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, Bolshevism was created in 1903 by Lenin, led by Lenin, whose mom was a Jew. Trotsky, his last name was Bronstein, he was a Jew. Kerensky, last name Kurbis, was a Jew. And later Stalin, who was a Jew per the B'nai B'rith and the book Life of Stalin by Ragusa. And he also married a Jew. So completely dominated by Jews. Lenin's brother was hanged for trying to assassinate Tsar Alexander in 1887. So being a murderer ran in the family. And a weird side note, Kerensky's dad was a principal at the school Lenin went to. So all these revolutionaries run in the same circles. So the Bolsheviks were financed by Schiff, Strauss, Kahn, Olaf Kuhn-Loeb, I think, and other Jewish bankers such as M.N. Warburg in Germany. You can see the book in answer to Father Coughlin's critics. Does a great job exposing all this. I found a May 11th, 1917 New York Times article that states there was another outburst of applause when Mr. Schiff, introduced by the Toastmaster as a Russian revolutionist, but he wasn't over there in Russia, but he financed it. On May 14th, 1917, the New York Times article actually stated, thanks are due to the Jew that the Russian Revolution succeeded. 1918, there was a report called the Sasson Report. I think it was part of the Creel Commission, and it links the bankers Warburg of the Federal Reserve and Furstenberg and others to financing weapons for Trotsky. And note that Lenin, financed by Schiff, also tried to start a revolution in Russia in 1905, but luckily he failed. So a few quotes to back up what I just stated. 1919 British White Paper on the Bolshevik Revolution stated, I consider that the immediate suppression of Bolshevism is the greatest issue now before the world, not even excluding the war which is still raging. And unless, as above stated, Bolshevism is nipped in the bud immediately, it is bound to spread in one form or another over Europe and the whole world, as it is organized and worked by Jews who have no nationality and whose one object is to destroy for their own ends the existing order of things. And you have to see the unredacted 1919 British White Paper. I guess they named the Jew too many times, and they issued a redacted white paper, which is obviously easier to find. So, Russia from the American Embassy, a book written by David R. Francis in 1921, discusses his time in Russia. And he wrote, Bolshevik headquarters has formally announced that a revolution similar to that in Russia has begun in Germany. This is 1916 to 18. The Bolshevik leaders here, for the most of whom are Jews and 90% of whom are returned exiles, care little for Russia or any other country, but are internationalists and they are trying to start a worldwide social revolution. If such a revolution can get a foothold in Germany, I begin to fear for the institutions not only of England, but of the Republic of France, and thought arises in my mind whether our own institutions are safe. This guy, a Jew, wrote in American Hebrew Magazine on September 10th, 1920, the work of reconstruction, which Jews are contemplating doing in Palestine, is only an infinitesimal, though revealing phase of the part which the Jewish people are playing in the reconstruction of the world. Out of the economic chaos, the discontent of the Jew evolved organized capital, with its working instrumentality, the banking system, which enslaves us all. The annihilation of Russian Tsarism. That achievement, destined to figure in history as the overwhelming, overshadowing result of the World War, was largely the outcome of Jewish thinking, of Jewish discontent, of Jewish effort to reconstruct. And what happened after the US Civil War? Reconstruction of the US into a communist oligarchy. The Bolshevik rulers of Russia, 1917, per the Overman Report, 24 of 25 Soviet revolutionary leaders were Jews. 1925, out of 554 commissars in communist Russia, 447 were Jews. And you can see the book Rulers of Russia by Reverend Dennis Fahey, and he does a fantastic job of laying out who actually ruled Russia. 1938, M. Butenko, a Russian diplomat that fled to Italy, stated that all the big industries are virtually and effectively in the hands of Jews. Regarding Ukraine, he said the entire administration, the important posts controlling works in the region, are in the hands of Jews or men devoted to Stalin. The inhabitants of the Ukraine, of this land, once fertile and flourishing, suffer from almost permanent famine. And he's referring to Holodomor. And note that at this time, anti-Semitism was classed as counter-revolutionary by Bolshevik leaders. How convenient. Jews don't want non-Jews criticizing them. Sounds familiar today, right? Results of the Bolshevik Revolution. In Russia, genocide of tens of millions at least. Genocide of the Russian aristocracy, Tsar Nicholas and his entire family, and much of their extended family. Genocide of the Christian leadership, pastors, priests, bishops, destruction of churches, monasteries, and cultural and historical monuments, buildings, renaming of Russian cities, Leningrad, Stalingrad, etc. Cancel culture. We're seeing that today. Per Wikipedia, which I don't recommend using, but every now and then you find some good info, the Soviet Union was the first state to have elimination of religion as an ideological objective. In the first 5 years after the Bolshevik Revolution, 28 bishops and 1,200 priests were executed. I think it's low. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Russian Orthodox Church, which had the largest congregation, had nearly all of its clergy and many of its believers shot or sent to labor camps. Continuing, Lenin ordered the Red Army to attack westward in 1918, per Wikipedia again. When the German soldiers under the leadership of Max Hoffman began to withdraw from Central and Eastern Europe in 1918, Lenin ordered the Western Army of the Red Army to advance westward. The main concern of this operation was to move through Central and Eastern Europe to install Soviet governments in the independent countries and to support the communist revolutions in Germany and Austria-Hungary. So who was on the offensive from 1918? So in Ukraine, they had the Holodomors in the 30s, and they had open genocide of Ukrainians before and after that, destruction of churches, farms, industry. Germany, we're going to get to, but they had the communist revolutions that were supported and protected by the Weimar government, or at least the Weimar didn't do anything about it. Austria, they had a Weimar-type republic and Weimar problems. 1934 communist uprising. They had financial crashes due to the Jewish-owned banks. Poland was invaded in 1920 by communist forces from Russia, and luckily they were able to beat them back. Unfortunately, the government became hostile to Germany for many reasons. 1939, I'm just jumping ahead here, the Katyn massacre by Soviets. And approximately 40,000 Polish leaders were murdered, and they tried to blame the Germans. Hungary, you had communist uprisings and invasion. You can see an Outlaw's Diary by Torme, which was a good book. The communists actually took over 1917 and 1920, and the leader was Bela Kun, or Ben Cohen. He was a leader, and he was actually the leader of other revolutions in other countries. He was exceptionally evil. At least 100,000 were murdered in Hungary. Romania was attacked by Soviet Hungary in 1918 and 1920. Uh, there were other communist uprisings, and it led to the rise of Codreanu and Antonescu, which were heroes, but now they're, called villains. Italy, communist uprisings as well, led to the rise of Mussolini. Results continued. In Spain, you had the communist uprisings, resulting in the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, which was really a communist invasion where they murdered thousands of Christian leaders, destroyed churches and cultural heritage sites. Estimated 500,000 people died in those from 36 to 39. And just a weird side note I came across. Guernica was communist propaganda. It's where they had that painting by Picasso. Guernica was a base of operations and a staging center for communists. It was a legitimate target. Spanish, not the Germans, were the majority who attacked. Picasso, who painted that painting, was a communist and a subversive who not only created communist propaganda, but degraded and perverted European art. And rich communists were the ones who created a market for his garbage. The Baltic nations, communist invasion of 1919, which German volunteers actually helped throw them out. Later on, there was another Soviet invasion in 1940, which resulted in the genocide of many Christians in all three Baltic countries. And here's a few quotes to back all that up. 1990 interview with a guy named Fedor Kazan. He was part of the Ukrainian 14th Waffen Grenadier Division, also known as the 1st Galatian. My family was forced to flee more than once to avoid Red Terror, and my father was murdered by a Jewish mob looking for Christians to murder. Because the Jews fully supported the Reds, it bred a hatred in Ukraine that lives to this day. I remember the seizures and deportations of the 30s. The Red police killed our neighbors, and their children disappeared. Unless you were a Jew or threw your lot into the party, they, the Soviets, hated you. The Germans finally arrived in an armored car. They jumped down with weapons drawn and came to our door. One spoke our language, but was very choppy. My sister laughed at him when he said he was a potato. He was actually asking if we had any food to spare. We welcomed him in and gave him water, milk, and a few potatoes to take with him. He offered money, which my sister took, and gave her a kiss on the cheek. She bragged about it for a month. All over Ukraine, as the Germans pushed the Reds away, we welcomed them as liberators. The very first act I witnessed was once they occupied Lviv, they opened and repaired the churches, which the Reds had closed. The church in Busk, which is where this guy had lived, secretly opened, but had to be very careful as the local bishop and his friends and family were all killed in the 20s by Jewish Reds. Another act the Germans put in place was to ask for help in policing the area against Reds and their allies, mainly Polish Reds. It's a little bit of a different story because we're told the Germans invaded Ukraine and everywhere, but they didn't. They liberated Ukraine and they were viewed as liberators. This is an interview from an Estonian member of the 20th Waffen Grenadier Division, or the 1st Estonian. There was a small clique who wanted to rejoin with the new Soviet Republic, but most of us wanted nothing to do with communism, as we heard about what the White Army went through and the countless victims who were killed for their beliefs. Sadly, the tiny Jewish population here threw in their lot with the Soviets. They secretly produced and distributed propaganda wanting an end of Christian dominance and freedom. Some even went so far to work with the secret police to turn in, arrest, and execute Christians who defied the system. Thousands went missing, churches closed down, and book burning took place to purge any hint of nationalism and Christianity. Only Marx, Lenin, and Trotsky were allowed. Soviet occupation was so bad that in June 41, everyone welcomed German troops as liberators. I must state that they behaved impressively. The first act they did after clearing the Soviets out was hand out food and reopen our churches. They won the admiration of the people very quickly. And here's an interview with a guy from the Spanish Civil War. He was a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, and he was a member of the Spanish Blue Division. I blame it all on the communists, who for decades prior had been gaining strength in Spain. The government was in the hands of communists who conveniently call themselves Republicans, kind of like here in the US. They tried to hide behind the mask of being democratic and fair. They were anything but that. The fighting started by them openly attacking nationalist areas where people fled to seek refuge. They began forcing the people to pay taxes and submit to their authority. Refusing meant death. They wanted to replace our culture with what they called modern thought. We could not bear to see that, as it meant an end to Christian morals and duty. Many Reds came to Spain from all over, especially Russia. They fought only for world revolution. They would kill without mercy. And note that modern thought is in today's world named cultural Marxism. Point to ponder, you can see that this time period, all these people in Russia and Eastern and Central Europe were dealing with an overt assault by communists and understood firsthand what that entailed. Here in the US at that time, communism took over covertly, under the radar for the most part, and so the US public didn't understand what was happening elsewhere. And the US media was already controlled by communists at that time. Now on to Germany. So the Versailles Treaty. Germany agreed to a truce while they were still occupying foreign territory. So basically, they were winning. They knocked Russia out of the war, and they could have moved all those armies to the Western Front. So when they had the treaty, Germany was excluded from the negotiation. I'm pretty sure negotiations require two parties, but Germans weren't allowed to be there. They did have two Weimar politicians attend, Hermann Muller and Johannes Bell. I can guarantee you they did not represent the German people. The American delegates, who I think America basically directed the treaty with the 14 points, and they had the most people there. But the people who represented America was basically a who's who of Satan's minions. You had Bernard Baruch, Thomas Lamont, Albert Strauss, Walter Lippmann, Felix Frankfurter, Justice Brandeis, unofficially Paul Warburg, Colonel House with 201 servants. All these met with and associated with Lord Balfour, Louis Marshall, Edmund de Rothschild, who hosted everybody at his Paris mansion, I guess, because they were celebrating. The World Zionist Organization attended. I don't remember anybody being at war with them, so I'm not sure why they would attend. You also had the American Jewish Congress attend. It was estimated 117 Jews attended the treaty. That doesn't sound right to me. Note that in 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, which basically guaranteed the Jews a homeland in Palestine. 20 years earlier, Kaiser Wilhelm had declined helping the Zionists obtain Palestine, and this caused Theodor Herzl to call him an anti-Semite because he didn't want to help. What a bad, bad person. Note that in 1928, the Soviets set up the Jewish Autonomous Oblast in their own nation, in Soviet Russia. So the Jews already had their homeland in Eastern Russia. Results of the Versailles Treaty. Loss of colonies, which meant a loss of resources and wealth. Germany only had a few. Loss of home territories where racial German nationals were living. Danzig, Sudetenland, Alsace-Lorraine, Memel, Posen, West Prussia. And note that in 1938, the French Air Minister, Pierre Cot, stated that Czechoslovakia could be used for planes to, quote, destroy the most important German industrial centers in a few hours. So I don't think they were at war yet, but obviously they were planning to be at war. Their treaty dismantled the military and navy. The Allies were supposed to follow afterwards and did not. So I'm pretty sure that pissed off the Germans a little bit. They prevented Germany and Austria from unification, but the people desired it because they were all German. The Rhine Saar mines were occupied by the French, or the Rhine area and the Saar mines were occupied by the French. The majority of Germany's gold and merchant fleet were stolen by the victors. Iron ore, coal, gasoline products, livestock, agricultural equipment, and well over 150,000 railway cars, locomotives, and trucks were taken by the victors. Doesn't quite sound fair. War guilt reparations. Germany was forced to pay to the victors a tremendous amount of money because they were accused of causing the war, but they were not. And the Versailles Treaty negated the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, which Germany had previously signed with Russia, where Russia had ceded the Baltic nations to Germany, and populations would determine their future, and Ukraine was given independence. But note that was done away with and it was negated. And so what happened? The Baltic nations were not given to Germany, which made them independent but very small, which made it easy for Russia to invade in 1919. And Ukraine, which should have been free, was given back to Soviet Russia, which then allowed Soviet Russia to um, conduct their terrorism against the poor Ukrainian population. Note that after the war, there was also actually, during the war, there was a naval embargo of Germany that continued after the war. So this continued until mid 1919. The war ended in 1918. So the Germans were unable to obtain food and medicine. 1 million died after the war, due largely to the British blockade and the sickness that followed. That was per SS General Karl Wolff. In December 1918, General Board of Public Health stated over 750,000 already died, and they still had a ways to go. Wikipedia kindly admits that at least 524,000 died in total, and the British ex-Prime Minister Lloyd George stated 700,000 people died as a result of the blockade. So on to Weimar Germany. The Kaiser was forced to abdicate. His cousin-in-law, the Tsar, was murdered a few months earlier, so maybe that had something to do with it, but that led to the Weimar Republic. Hugo Preuss was a liberal Jew who wrote the Weimar Constitution, but I'm pretty sure they were a Christian country, so why is a Jew writing the Weimar Constitution? He was appointed to write it by Friedrich Ebert, who was an atheist, Marxist, social democrat. All these people were basically part of the Social Democrat Party. Hugo Haas is also involved. He was a Jew Marxist, and he was a lawyer for Karl Liebknecht, who was a Marxist revolutionary, part of the Spartacus uprising with Rosa Luxemburg, who was another Jew. So the Weimar basically allowed the growth of communism and Marxism. They didn't do anything to really stop it. They contributed to the destruction of German society and culture. Berlin, big cities, became the center for prostitution, sodomy, pedophilia, etc. The quote-unquote hyperinflation caused by the private Reichsbank and foreign speculators and the new government helped destroy the middle and lower class Germans. You had massive debt, loans, speculators, the Dawes and Young Acts all helped financially destroy Germany. And note the Dawes Act was a direct result of the manufactured hyperinflation. Weimar continued. Just note that I found an article from December 15th, 1922, New York Times, where Franklin Delano Roosevelt, president of the company called United European Investors Limited, was advertising to invest in tangible property in Germany. Quote, those who place the value of these marks in German tangible property shall have the opportunity to realize a profit through the ownership of a share of the business. An example given was the shares of the German Edison Company, which was an electric company, purchased in 1922 for $23 each. The normal value of those per 1913 value was $538. So clearly, the speculators like Franklin Delano Roosevelt knew that they were going to make a killing once they reversed the quote unquote hyperinflation. So, and obviously, the German people were not able to get enough money to invest because they were just barely getting enough to buy a loaf of bread. And one interesting note that prices increased and then German banknotes were issued for billions and trillions. So just a point to ponder there. And then who waged undeclared war against Germany? Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So he screwed them when they were down, and then he screwed them when they were up. Germany's battle against the Marxists, communist Bolsheviks during the Weimar era, from 1919 to 1933, nonstop communist subversion of society, culture, government. Communists infiltrated military and police. Kind of familiar today, right? Set up a legion of organizations to organize and hide their activities, kind of like George Soros today. And I mean, we see these groups all over our nation and all nations. Communists use terrorism like bombings and assassinations. The spread of sexual perversion and prostitution to degrade culture and society, pornographic literature, etc. They encouraged crime. The Weimar released prisoners, criminals not held accountable. Gee, that sounds familiar today. Subversive literature, communist literature, and pornography is what was actually burned in the 1930s. So that's what the Germans were burning. So, but they don't tell you that. They defaced and destroyed church property, Soviet uprisings in Bremen, Brunswick, Baden, Munich, and other areas. There were street fights in Germany. A creation of an actual Red Army, 50 to 80,000 in the Ruhr district. Communist-controlled unions, which created strikes and caused a lot of financial and economic disruptions. Continued, 1932, Germany estimated there were 1 million armed communists in Germany. You can see the book Communism in Germany by Ert, 1933. It's a great book. So all of this resulted in the rise of National Socialism and many other nationalist groups. Does everything above sound familiar? BLM Antifa are today's Marxists here in our country and all over the world. Note, in 1920, the communists claimed the slogan anti-fascism, and we're hearing that today. Only Italy was fascist, nobody else. But anyone anywhere who opposed the communists was termed a fascist. And we're seeing that today everywhere. So this is a quote from the book Communism Germany by Eric. Alongside of social Bolshevism with its incitement to class hatred and civil war, a quite special task was assigned during this period to cultural Bolshevism, which was to disintegrate the moral power of resistance of the nation in books, pamphlets, periodicals, films, theaters, and meetings, break up the social community, and undermine and destroy the German character. The kernel of cultural Bolshevism was formed by the recklessly hateful and low godless movement. While the propaganda in favor of free love, heard that before, moral decay and moral perversity was able in the cleverest way to harness the sexual impulse for the political aims of the Communist International. And free love, we've heard that before. 1960s, Woodstock, hippie culture, they just brought it here. And of course, Americans didn't realize. So the same tactics used against us to subvert and pervert our society and culture were already previously used against the Germans. So this is an interview, just to back up what I'm saying above. This is the guy who was a member of the Waffen SS, and he said, and this guy had been a Marxist. He started out as a Marxist. He said, our Marxist leader was a Jewish man who kept his faith, which I thought odd, while he demanded we reject ours and actually turn on it. That was what always bothered me about them, the Marxists. Even from the beginning, nothing was for Germany, and it was always about Moscow and world conquest. I did have to keep a low profile, as some were very violent. They would find out where SA men lived and attack their homes and family, or getting them fired for their beliefs. Lloyd George, the former prime minister, stated in 1933, if the powers succeed in overthrowing National Socialism in Germany, communism will follow. That is why every communist in the world, from Russia to America, is praying, communists don't pray, that the Western nation should bully Germany into a communist revolution. Germany's recovery, starting in 1933. National Socialists and their allies won the Reichstag in 1933. Hitler was appointed as chancellor in 1933 and elected as president in 1934. Kicked out, they kicked out many foreign Marxist and communist invaders. They withdrew from the League of Nations, which was the first attempt at one world government, and they withdrew because they didn't feel that anybody was listening to them over what was happening on the Polish border, etc. Um, so Germany reclaimed their own lost territory, Austria, Memel, Czechoslovakia, or part of Czechoslovakia. They instituted a new financial system. They got rid of or reduced usury. 0% interest loans were offered by government. They paid money into circulation for labor. The government directly paid money into circulation for labor. That is key. They didn't have to go through a privately owned central bank and use bank credit, which is just debt with interest attached. This threatened the existing Jewish financial system. So, yeah, you can see why the Jews are pretty angry. Um, Note that the Germans arrested Louis Rothschild in Austria in 1938. He was associated with the failure of the largest bank in Austria in 1931, the Credit Anstal, and he was involved in a whole bunch, or the Jews were involved in a whole bunch of financial issues in Austria. Um, the Hitler created more jobs. Unemployment went from 6 million to under 1 million in just a few years. It's pretty amazing. Again, government paid money into circulation for labor. They didn't need debt, didn't need gold. There was incredible expansion of infrastructure, the Autobahn, for example, inventions. An example was all the synthetic material they were inventing, replacing raw material that they couldn't get. Manufacturing increased tremendously. An example would be like Volkswagen. I mean, there was tons and tons of different inventions, medical inventions, discoveries during this time period. And all of this posed a threat to the existing international megacorporations like the DuPonts and all the other Jews that own the massive mega international corporations. The Germans reduced taxes to help the people. That would be nice if they did that today here. Exports increased while imports decreased, which meant more income for the country. Continuing Germany's recovery, they eventually stopped paying the illegal debt, the Dawes-Young Act, and reparations to the victor nations. Um, they created a strength through joy program where workers now had paid vacation time, resorts were built, and cruise ships were built for the workers. So we can thank the Germans for actually having paid vacation time. Um, Affordable homes were built so everybody could own, right? They didn't want everybody renting, kind of like in today's world. Approximately 1.4 million homes were built in just 4 years. They restarted, rebuilt thousands of farms that had went under during the Weimar era. They wanted to try to be self-sustaining. They created youth groups like the Hitler Youth and the BDM, which was a girls' version. They also had Hitler Youth for the disabled, or they allowed the disabled to enter the Hitler Youth. There was no killing of disabled people or invalids like the Jews claim, just another lie. You can see Fred Stevens' book Hitler Youth, 1973. The Germans actually relaxed the gun laws. You could see the German weapons law, March 18th, 1938. So they did not take any guns from anybody. That is another Jewish lie. They passed a law on animal protection, November 24th, 1933, which was against torment and neglect, and I think vivisection as well. They planted forests. They were very nature oriented. And they ended the oppression of Christianity and searched for the truth regarding the link between our race and Christianity via the Anunnaki, which was called the Ancestral Heritage Organization. And I think it's very important to note the Germans were not anti-Christian. They were Christian. They were anti the Jewish influence within the established churches. but they weren't even against the churches. They just wanted the Jewish influence to be removed. So, in regarding the ancestral heritage, an interesting quote, and I could talk for hours about this. Himmler posed the question, perhaps the Jews of today are not the same people the Bible speaks about. Perhaps they are liars and deceivers who have stolen the identity of the true great race of the Creator. And that was by Lena Heydrich, who was the wife of Reinhard Heydrich, who was a great man and unfairly vilified via lies. And note that Himmler there is, I believe, citing John 8:44. So, and just to reiterate that the Germans were Christian, and that the Germans also attempted to help get the Jews out of their get help get the Jews their own homeland, basically get them out of Germany. The Havara Agreement, Madagascar Plan, Evian Conference in 1938, which out of like 30 something countries that attended that conference, only the Dominican Republic was willing to accept Jews. But that wasn't good enough for the Jews. They didn't want to go there. And there were negotiations with Schacht in 1939. So basically, everything that we have been told about Germany, the truth is actually the opposite. Everything we've been told is a lie. And some quotes to back up what I just talked about. Interview with Richard Grimm. He was in Pioneer Battalion 305, and he wrote, when Adolf Hitler came to power, he turned things around for most all Germans. For those who own businesses, for example, they foundered under the slew of taxes the Weimar government imposed. Under Hitler, taxes were redone and made very fair for everyone. It made it so you could grow the business more and hence higher, where the worker would then pay taxes to add to the whole. To say Germany experienced a rebirth after 1933 is an understatement in my mind. This is an interview with Peter Eichhorn, who was a National Socialist administrative person, I think. He said, I was appointed to a committee in 1937 to study German law regarding ownership of firearms. We reported that German gun laws were antiquated and unfair to the law-abiding German citizen. We recommended that strict gun laws be eased and that there be no restrictions on gun ownership. German citizens were encouraged to own firearms and to pass this right on to their children. We lowered the age a person could buy a weapon from 21 to 18, allowed the ownership of as many weapons as a person wanted, and allowed for citizens to carry pistols at any time and anywhere. This, of course, required a police permit showing proper understanding of use and the law. Many old laws were erased to reduce state power. Hunting no longer required permits, as it was a citizen's natural right to use the land as needed. The only exception was if you were trophy hunting. Then a tax permit was issued to help pay for replenishment and conservation. Shooting clubs and gun shows were promoted to every German, and children were encouraged to learn to shoot and hunt. The old restrictions of the Kaiser and Weimar eras were gone. And you can also look at the book German Gun Laws, 1928 to 1945. Crystal Thunen was a member of the League of German Girls and Faith and Beauty. She must have been beautiful like all Germans. She stated, I want to tell you that during the Weimar era, teen pregnancy was a problem. Girls were encouraged to be promiscuous by the Jew. And then when they became pregnant, there was no use for them, so they were thrown back to a society who scorned them. National Socialist Germany tackled the problem of teen promiscuity head on and was not afraid of it. When I turned 14, my BDM leader had me attend a training on mixing with the opposite sex. This training laid down a code of conduct for German youth and was endorsed by parents. It was understood that nature is in full force in teens, but you also had to remember your body is a holy vessel. It should be admired. It can be shown off. It can be touched, but never let your body succumb to temptation until an adult and married, when you can easily handle the consequences. They taught us many problems arise from sex without commitment and love. we were taught how to handle advances from boys and how to have a relationship with the opposite sex without having sex. This was the BDM. It made us ready for anything and everything life could throw at you. Ingrid Weckert, who was a German author who spoke Hebrew, visited Israel and was friendly with Menachem Begin, so she may have been a Jew. She wrote, I am always, but she identified as a German. I am always amazed whenever I read books about the Third Reich published after the war. Most give an almost totally false impression of the reality of the Third Reich. I was brought up during the Third Reich. We were brought up to love and respect our country and people, to be proud of its great history. They spurred us to honesty and responsibility in our own lives. In my opinion, the youth of Adolf Hitler's Germany was the finest in all of Europe and perhaps the entire world. Bernard Ritter, family member of the second largest newspaper publisher in the US, or X, a long time ago, stated in 1933, it is utter nonsense to cite the existence of Nazi stormtroops and the steel helmet men as evidence of a militaristic spirit in the country. These troops are solely for protection against communists. That and nothing more. And the world has many reasons to be grateful to Germany for this successful service. I came to Germany from America when the agitation against Germany was at its height. I found substantiation here for my belief that certain groups of Jews had exaggerated and falsified reports from Germany in order to stage their propaganda more effectively. And note, I was browsing through the Chronicling America website, millions of historic newspaper articles on there, and I looked through hundreds, maybe even close to 1,000 with the keywords of Hitler, etc. And 99% of the articles were lies. So even in the 1920s and 30s, Americans were not getting the truth about Germany or really anything else. Lloyd George, the ex-Prime Minister of England, stated in 1936, I have now seen the famous German leader and also something of the great change he has effected. It had an extraordinary effect in unifying the nation. Catholic and Protestant, Prussian and Bavarian, employer and workman, rich and poor have been consolidated into one people. There is a passion for unity born of dire necessity. I have never met happier people than the Germans, and Hitler is one of the greatest men. Important note, the Germans overcame the typical Jewish communist tactic of divide and conquer. The Duke of Windsor, King Edward VIII, in 1937, stated, I have traveled the world, and my upbringing has made me familiar with the great achievements of mankind. But that which I have seen in Germany, I had hitherto believed to be impossible. It cannot be grasped and is a miracle. And note, he was forced to abdicate in 1936, forced to abdicate the throne. And this is probably why Albert Speer, who was a high German official, stated, I am certain through him permanent friendly relations could have been achieved. If he had stayed, everything would have been different. Joseph Goebbels wrote, it is a shame he is no longer king. With him, we would have entered into an alliance. So maybe a different outcome of the war. So Judea declares war on Germany, 1933. So March 24th, 1933, the Daily Express headline reads, Judea declares war on Germany. Declared Jews of the world unite in economic boycott of Germany. So it was an economic war against Germany. Samuel Untermeyer reiterated this in 1936. Note the article states only 600,000 Jews in Germany. I'm going off on a tangent. It's been claimed over 100,000 Germans who were Jewish fought for Germany, including Admiral Rogue, Admiral Asher, General Zuckertort, General Wilberg, Colonel Hollander, General Heinrici, Field Marshal Milch, who was personal friends with Goring. A little bit different story there, right? Doesn't quite make sense based on what we're told. And note that when Milch surrendered his Field Marshal baton to British General Derek Mills Roberts, Roberts beat him with the baton, and Milch was imprisoned until 1954. but the war was over in 1945, so why would he be in prison for 9 years? Note that Emil Morris was half Jewish, member of the SA and SS, and was Hitler's first personal driver. Weird. And he was in prison until 1949 after the war. And another side note, note that in March 1938, FDR tried to settle immigrant Jews in Venezuela because there was a backlog of 110,000 German visas and 1,000 a day from Austria. And you can see the FDR letter from June 3rd, 1938 to Antonio C. Gonzalez. So just to point out, who do you think those 110,000 German visas were? They certainly weren't Christian Germans because they were very happy there under Hitler. And how many left before 1938? How many left after 1938? Just points to ponder. Judea declares war continued 1941. So this is after the war began, but still to make a point. Theodor Kaufmann published a book titled Germany Must Perish. Sounds genocidal, right? It advocated for the genocide of Germans. Also made a map in the book dismembering Germany. 1941, there was something called a Gomberg map, created by Maurice Gomberg, who was an Eastern European Jew living in the U.S. It was completed in October 1941, prior to U.S. entry. Note the officials try to say it was created in 1942, but it's not true. It was a map that showed the U.S. and USSR dividing Europe and Germany, and a creation of Hebrew land, where Israel is today. And note there was a document included with the map that talks about a UN and a EU type organizations, along with a one world currency and the destruction of the German, Italian, and Japanese people. So, yeah. And also, the Jews continued agitation against, and they were responsible for many assassinations in the 1930s of Germans. So, not only was it a financial war against the Germans, but it was also a propaganda war against them and a physical war against them with a bunch of Jewish communists assassinating German officials. So pre-war point to ponder number one. Who controlled the world geographically? Right? We're told Germany wanted to conquer the world, but who already conquered the world? Well, Britain, 1940, owned 77 territories. From what I read, they owned about 25% of the world geographically and 25% of the world's population. So, I don't know. Sounds like they controlled the world. And then the other half of the world, in the US pre-war controlled or influenced much of the Western Hemisphere. And for example, the banana republics. And you can read General Smedley Butler's book, War of the Racket, on that, where our government backed a whole bunch of freaking Jewish corporations to go take over a whole bunch of Central American republics. So the U.S. controlled the Western Hemisphere, and Britain owned 25% of the rest of the world. So, yeah. Pre-war point to ponder number two: who had the largest navy? So you need a navy to conquer the world, right? So who had the largest navy? United Kingdom had 15 battleships, 7 aircraft carriers, 66 heavy cruisers, and hundreds of smaller ships. This is before they even geared up for war. The U.S. had 15 battleships, 5 aircraft carriers, 37 cruisers, and hundreds of destroyers and submarines. And what did Germany have? At the start of the war, they had 57 U-boats. Pretty sure they weren't planning on invading anybody with 57 U-boats. And for the entire war, Germany created 0 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, 9 cruisers, and 22 destroyers. I'm pretty sure they were not trying to take over the world. Pre-point, pre-war point to ponder number 3: who controlled the war financially? Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Morgans, Kuhn, Loeb, Schiff, Kahn, Lehmans, Warburgs, Sassoon, Seligmans. All central banks were privately owned. The BIS, all owned by the same people, a bunch of Jews. In Proverbs 22:7, the borrower is a servant to the lender. If all governments are in debt to the banks, then who do you think runs the world? Now, does this make sense if preparing for world domination? Per Wikipedia, between 1936 and 1938, Captain Wiedemeyer was one of a handful of United States Army officers who attended the Academy in Berlin. While there, he received instruction in armored warfare from Heinz Guderian and in geopolitics from Karl Haushofer. He also met senior National Socialist Party leaders such as Goering and Bormann. Soon after graduation from the school, he attended, as one of many international observers, the German Army Grand Maneuvers of 1938. That doesn't make any sense if the Germans are preparing to take over the world to have people come and talk about Blitzkrieg with Heinz Guderian and their worldview with Karl Haushofer. I mean, I don't know, that'd be pretty dumb because they weren't planning on taking over the world. So on to Poland. The Polish government had been causing tension since the 1920s through the border war into the 1920s. Example, the Battle of Annenberg, which was the Polish incursion into Silesia. The Battle of Annenberg was the largest battle of the Polish incursion. Uh, Polish communists and radical nationalists were murdering German nationals living in Poland and Germany near the border. Hitler appealed to Poland and the international community to stop the atrocities. England, led by Churchill, and France and the US, all guaranteed to support Poland. This caused Poland to refuse to negotiate with Germany or take any action against what was happening to the German population in Poland. And this is a side note, per Wikipedia, Moses Montefiore's correspondence with the British consul in Damascus, Charles Henry Churchill, in 1841 to 1842, is seen as pivotal to the development of Proto-Zionism. So the Churchill family was already working with the Jews in the 1840s. Who do you think Churchill was working for in the 1930s to initiate the war against Germany? And you can see the book, The Image of Germans in Polish Literature. Good book discussing how the Polish viewed the Germans and all their lives and everything. So here's a few quotes to back up what I just talked about. The interview with Hannelore Dox. She was a member and she lived in Silesia. So she said, I was born in a small town called Annenberg, which was in Silesia. After the war, the Poles tried to take more of German land than what the treaty gave them. They were even aided by some who lived in our area who were anarchists. We heard terrible stories of how bad the fighting was. The remnants of the German army formed Free Corps units to stop the invasions. This fighting went on well into the 20s, on and off. We had issues with Poles sneaking across the border and stealing from the farmers. I had something happen to me that was scary. I was young and taking feed to the cows when I noticed men running along the tree line. I went to see what was happening out of curiosity, and when I crested the hill, I was grabbed by one of them. They spoke Polish, which I understood little. He threw me down and kicked me and then ran off. We called the police, but they found nothing of them. I heard them tell my father this happens a lot, but there was not a lot they could do due to treaties and laws. Ernst Krag, of the battalion commander of the Das Reich Division, stated Poland had a greater hand in causing the war than historians care to study. And add Allied interference and treachery, it made a conflict inevitable, as Poland refused to negotiate or rein in the extreme nationalists. Here's a long quote from Rudolf von Ribbentrop. He was the son of Joachim von Ribbentrop, who was the head diplomat for Germany. So you would think Rudolf has a lot of insight. He stated, well, as you know, the war with Poland started what we call the Second World War. My father worked to avoid the war at all costs. I remember him coming home cursing the English as they were meddling in a dispute between our nations. Poland was a beneficiary of ancestral German lands that the World War I victors gave them to create their nation. Poland was not the enemy of Germany. We did not want to fight them. the Fuhrer made a campaign promise to reunite the lost territory. This was one of the most basic tenets of the NSDAP program. He was successful in brokering the return of the Sudetenland, Memel, and the reunification with Austria. Poland was the last of the issues, and it was made worse by the border incursions that were going on, holdovers from the border wars of the early 20s started by Poland. Continuing, my father told me that the Fuhrer wanted a peaceful resolution with Poland at any cost, and the concessions that my father offered Poland were quite liberal. They refused due to England's goading not to give back territory, and that England would stand with Poland if attacked. My father was furious with Beck as he knew what the outcome could be. Poland stood to make lots of money with trade and to be given a free passage to the North Sea, among other more notable concessions from Germany. Poland not only had England backing them, but also had anti-German faction who actually wanted a war so they could grab more territory they felt cheated out of. The attacks on border areas only seemed to prove Poland did not want peace, as they refused to step in to prosecute anyone guilty. I remember from the press some Germans were killed in these attacks. My father worked very hard to achieve peace, but England pushed Poland with false promises to become quite belligerent to Germany. All that my nation asked for was a simple rail and roadway with free passage to link East Prussia. The lands Poland was given could be negotiated with money and trades later on. Everything you are taught today regarding this issue is false. Germany tried hard for peace, but was pushed into a war that soon exploded out of our control. Who declared war on who? Germany attacked Poland, but there was no declaration of war. It started out as a border conflict. Russia then invaded Poland. Russia then invaded Finland. Russia then invaded the Baltic countries, which Lithuania actually asked for German help in 1940, which the Germans declined because they weren't ready to actually get into a conflict with Russia. Russia also invaded part of Romania in 1940. Yet France, England, India, Australia, and New Zealand all declared war on Germany on September 3rd. So why did England and France not declare war on Soviet Russia after Russia invaded Poland, or Finland, or the Baltic countries, or Romania? Why did England and France and the US allow Soviet Russia to occupy Poland after the war? Right? Didn't they guarantee Poland independence? Doesn't really make any sense. South Africa declared war on Germany. Then Canada declared war on Germany. Germany only declared war on Yugoslavia, which note they did because the Yugoslavian government had been friendly to Germany, but was overthrown by an Allied-backed coup. So Germany took immediate action to get rid of that. Germans declared war on Soviet Russia for obvious reasons. And then the Germans declared war on the US, but the US was already waging an undeclared war against Germany. So it was really a moot point. So every other Allied nation declared war on Germany. So who actually caused the World War? It wasn't Germany. The Allies made it into a world war. Note that Denmark invited Germany to defend their nation. Note that England was going to invade Norway and Sweden, and you can go look up Plan R4. So Germany preempted them. You can see the book, Documents on the Events Preceding the Outbreak of War by the German Foreign Office in 1940. It's about 750 pages proving who started the war, which were the Allies. Hitler offered to end the war and actually asked England for peace in 1940 and 1941. The war could have been over, but Churchill rejected it because Churchill wanted war. The U.S. waging undeclared war on Germany. German White Paper 1940 captured Polish documents proving the U.S. was urging Poland and England not to negotiate with Germany. And it sounds like our involvement in Ukraine today, right? The U.S. is getting involved everywhere all the time. And when you do, that means you're at war with whoever the opponent is of the person you're backing. So the Lend-Lease program was an overt act of war against Germany, where we gave Russia and the United Kingdom billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of material to Russia and England, mostly to Russia. And Russia probably would have lost, or a good chance they would have lost the war without everything we gave them. We gave them at least 1,000 warplanes, 1,000 tanks, thousands and thousands of vehicles, and just everything, anything you could possibly think of. And I would go through Major Jordan's diaries. It was a fantastic book because he was involved in the Lend-Lease. And his book also proved that the UN was created in 1941 and 42, not, I believe, 45, which I think is what we're told. Note that the U.S. attacked German ships and submarines prior to being at war. We confiscated German ships and property in the United States. And on September 11th, 1941, they love September 11th, FDR issues a shoot on sight order to attack German submarines. That's literally a declaration of war against Germany in September. And yet Germany was still trying to avoid war with the US. And note December 4th, 1941, the Chicago Daily Tribune, there was a Chicago Daily Tribune article titled FDR's War Plans, because he had pre-planned to attack Germany and her allies. And that article laid out a whole bunch of, great information. And then 3 days later, convenience happened. And we were able to get into the war. So to back all that up, Charles Lindbergh Jr. stated, the pressure of the Jews on President Roosevelt and on the State Department is becoming ever more powerful. The Jews are right now the leaders in creating a war psychosis which would plunge the entire world into war and bring about general catastrophe. This mood is becoming more and more apparent. This hatred has become a frenzy. It is propagated everywhere and by every means, in theaters, in the cinema, in the press. The Germans are portrayed as a nation living under the arrogance of Hitler, who wants to conquer the whole world and drown all of humanity in an ocean of blood. This international Jewry exploits every means of propaganda to oppose any tendency towards any kind of consolidation and understanding between nations. In this way, the conviction is growing steadily but surely in public opinion here that the Germans and their satellites, in the form of fascism, are enemies who must be subdued by the democratic world. The Jews are one of the principal forces attempting to lead the U.S. into war. The Jews' greatest danger to this country lies in their large ownership and influence of our motion pictures, our press, our radio, and our government. I am saying that the leaders of the Jewish race wish to involve us in a war for reasons that are not American. James Forrestal, in his diary, wrote December 27th, 1945, played golf with Joe Kennedy, who was the U.S. ambassador to Britain. He says that Chamberlain stated that America and world Jewry forced England into World War II, and Kennedy's view that Hitler would have fought Russia without any later conflict with England if it had not been for Bullitt, who was a U.S. diplomat. And note that after the war, Forrestal was murdered. Rabbi Felix Mendelssohn, Chicago Sentinel, October 8th, 1942. The Second World War is being fought for the defense of the fundamentals of Judaism. I wasn't taught that in school. Thought we were fighting for freedom and democracy. Toronto Evening Telegram, February 26, 1940. Rabbi Perlswig stated, the World Jewish Congress has been at war with Germany for 7 years. And what did they do in 1933, right? March 24th, the Jews declared war on Germany. So Perlswig is confirming that fact. General George Van Horn Mosley, He was a World War I vet and personal friends with General Patton. In 1939, stated, "The war now proposed is for the purposes of establishing Jewish hegemony throughout the world." So the German preemptive attack on Soviet Communist Russia. Russia was set up for an offensive war against Germany. Reasons Hitler gave for the preemptive attack on the Soviets, June 22nd, 1941. He stated there was no animosity to the Russians, only to the Bolshevik government. So that's important. The Germans did not hate the Russian people or anybody else unless you were a communist. Germany never tried to carry its ideology to Russia or anywhere else. Soviet Soviets and Bolsheviks have attacked all of Europe and Russia for 20 plus years. After Poland, he Hitler extended peace offers to England and France, which were rejected. So he actually offered France a peace offer before before the Germans invaded in 1940. And note that the French invaded Germany first. So, and Hitler stated that England was working with Soviet Russia to encircle Germany. The Soviets attacked Finland in 1939. Soviets occupied the Baltic nations in 1940. The Soviets attacked and occupied part of Romania in June 1940. The Soviets and English encouraged and caused the Serbian-Yugoslavian coup. Soviets massed military units along the border beginning in 1940. The U.S. was arming Russia and England even before Germany was at war with Russia. In June 1917, June 17th to 18th, the Germans claimed the Soviet patrols had already attacked German units. So if that's true, Russia started the war. And therefore, so Hitler then stated, therefore, the hour has now come in which it has become necessary to oppose this conspiracy of the Jewish Anglo-Saxon warmongers and likewise the Jewish ruling powers in the Bolshevik control station at Moscow. Hitler stated, the mission of this front, therefore, is no longer the protection of individual countries, but the securing of Europe and hence the salvation of all. And you can see Hitler's June 22nd, 1941 speech. You can also read Stalin's War of Extermination by Hoffman. Great book. So a few quotes to back up what I just read, and back up what Hitler said. This is an interview with Hans Theisen from the Totenkopf division, and he stated, we had a terrific sense of duty that for the last time the Bolshevik menace to the world would be over. On June 21st, our leaders pulled all battalions in for briefings. Ours spoke for roughly an hour. He said a great battle was about to begin between Germany and our allies and Jewish Bolshevism. He was a professor before the war and studied Russia and its history. He said to prepare for a long war, but hope for a short campaign. I should like to mention to you that he stressed to us that we would be at war against an ideology, not the Russian people. The first prisoners we took were European Russians. They hated the Bolsheviks as much as we did, and they wanted their country freed. And note, in his interview later on, he made a comment that in 1942 they started seeing not European Russians, white people, but they started seeing Asiatic Russians or Soviets. So interesting thing to look into. Ernst Krag of the battalion commander of the Das Reich division stated, I want to emphasize we fought against Bolshevism, not the Russian people. Stalin successfully convinced the people we were fighting them. This was not true. It was Bolshevism we wanted to destroy. Most Russians welcomed us as liberators and willingly helped us fight in any way they could. In the beginning, we saw so many prisoners and war material that I believe the case could be made that Stalin was planning an attack on Germany, and we hit them before they could attack. Of course, historians mock this idea today, but they were not at the front. Our forces were woefully understrength for this type of war. Rudolf von Ribbentrop stated, The government of Russia was very clever in making the war a Germany versus Russia war instead of a Europe versus Bolshevism war. We occupied large areas, and the civil population treated us as liberators in most areas. Hans von der Heide of the 10th SS Panzer Division stated, when asked why he fought, the destiny of the whole of Europe was at stake. And to finish, this is an interview with Gudrun Himmler, who is Heinrich Himmler's daughter, and she said, National Socialism was born due to a nation being plundered and taken advantage of, with the people lacking the proper will to live and fight for their future. The Fuhrer and those around him saw the problems, identified what was causing the problems, and showed the solution to solve the problems. The idea of a people standing on their own 2 feet and taking the reins of their future are offensive to those who want to plunder and make huge profits off a people they slowly want to destroy. Continuing, we loved our people, nation, and creator. We wished no ill will on any other people, but we demanded they leave us alone. We loved the Europe of our ancestors and wanted to preserve the priceless culture that had given the world every good thing it knows today. Because we loved our people, our nation, and our leaders, we are called racist and hateful. We truly live in a world upside down. We fought so that the world would be a better place. We insisted that Germany be given control of its destiny. And in conclusion, Germany never wanted a war, but was forced into it. Being they were forced to fight, they felt it was their duty to fight for freedom, liberty, and their God given rights, which were under attack by the world conspiracy that we are now experiencing and witnessing the final stages being played out. The Germans liberated, not invaded. We ended up being the unwitting invaders helping enslave Germany and the world.